You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it. You didn't make a single bad decision with it. You did exactly what every financial advisor, every parent, every conventional piece of money wisdom told you to do. You saved it. And inflation took it anyway. Not dramatically. Not in a way that shows up on your bank statement. Not in a way that triggers an alert or sends a notification or gives you the dignity of a warning. It happened slowly, quietly, invisibly. The number in your account stayed exactly the same. And everything that number could buy quietly got smaller. That is what inflation does. And in February 2026, after years of elevated prices that have only partially come back down, the damage to ordinary savers is larger than most people have stopped to calculate. Today, we are going to calculate it. And once you see the number, the real number, you will never look at your savings account the same way again. Let's start with the most important concept in personal finance that almost no one teaches: the difference between nominal value and real value. Nominal value is the number on the screen. It is what your bank shows you. It is the figure you think of when someone asks how much you have saved. It is the number that feels safe, that feels earned, that feels like proof of discipline and restraint. Real value is what that number can actually do in the world. What it buys, how far it stretches, how many months of rent it covers, how many tanks of gas, how many bags of groceries, how many years of retirement it funds. Inflation is the gap between those two numbers. And over the past few years, that gap has grown into a canyon. Here is the arithmetic. If inflation runs at 6% for a single year, and in several major economies, it ran significantly higher than that during 2022 and 2023, then $10,000 in savings at the start of that year has the purchasing power of roughly $9,400 by the end of it. You lost $600 in real terms. Not to a bad investment, not to a fee, not to fraud, just to time, just to inflation doing what inflation does. Now hold that rate across 2 or 3 years. Run it at 5%, then 4%, then 3%. Do the compounding. The erosion is not linear. It accelerates. $10,000 subjected to 5 years of moderate inflation can lose 15 to 20% of its real value. That is not a rounding error. That is years of work quietly undone. And here's what makes it especially painful. Most savings accounts through this entire period paid interest rates that did not come close to keeping pace with inflation. For years, while inflation was running at 4, 5, 6%, ordinary savings accounts were offering a fraction of a percent. You were falling behind in real terms every single month, and your bank statement was telling you everything was fine. This is not an accident. It is not a conspiracy, but it is a structural reality of how monetary systems work, and one that almost no one explains clearly to ordinary savers. Let's talk about what inflation actually is, because most explanations are either too abstract or too politicized to be useful. At its most basic level, inflation means that the same amount of money buys fewer goods and services than it did before. The currency itself becomes less valuable relative to the things it is exchanging for. This can happen for several reasons, and understanding which reason is driving inflation at any given moment matters enormously. Supply-side inflation happens when the cost of producing things goes up, when energy prices spike, when supply chains break, when raw materials become scarce. The things cost more to make, so they cost more to buy. This is what drove a significant portion of the 2021 and 2022 inflation surge globally. Demand-side inflation happens when there is more money in the system chasing the same amount of goods. When governments send stimulus checks to millions of people simultaneously, when central banks flood the financial system with liquidity, when credit becomes so cheap that spending accelerates, demand rises faster than supply can respond. Prices follow. Wage inflation happens when workers gain bargaining power and push up labor costs, which get passed through to consumers in the form of higher prices for everything those workers produce or service. In practice, inflation is usually all three happening at once, in different proportions, in different sectors. Food inflation has its own dynamics. Housing inflation has its own. Energy runs on geopolitical cycles. Healthcare follows its own structural cost pressures. When people say inflation is running at 3 or 4%, that single number hides enormous variation underneath it. And depending on how you actually spend your money, your personal inflation rate may be very different from the official headline figure. This is critical. The official CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is a statistical average across a basket of goods and services. It is a useful approximation, but if you spend a larger than average share of your income on rent, or on healthcare, or on food, or on energy, your lived experience of inflation is worse than the official number suggests. The headline figure is not a lie, it is an average. And averages, by definition, do not describe you. Now let's bring this back to your savings, because there is a second layer to this that goes beyond just purchasing power erosion, and it involves the psychology of saving itself. Most people hold cash savings as a form of security, a buffer, a way of sleeping at night, knowing that if something goes wrong, a job loss, a health emergency, a major repair, They have something to fall back on. That psychological value is real and it matters. But inflation attacks it in a way that is particularly cruel because it does not attack the feeling of security. It attacks the reality of it while leaving the feeling intact. You still feel safe. Your balance has not moved. But the actual protection that balance provides, measured in real-world purchasing power, has shrunk. You feel secure, but you're less secure than you were. And you might not discover that gap until the moment you need the money most. This is why financial literacy around inflation is not a luxury for economists. It is a survival skill for anyone who earns money, holds money, and plans to use that money someday. So what do you actually do about it? The first thing is to measure it, not in the abstract, specifically. A sudden 40% inflation rate forces people to act. It is impossible to ignore. The moderate but sustained inflation of recent years has been easy to mentally discount, to defer, to treat as temporary while it quietly erodes the real value of what you have built. We are in February 2026. Inflation has moderated from its peak, but in most major economies it has not returned to the pre-pandemic normal. The damage of the past few years to real savings balances is not going to be reversed. The purchasing power lost over the past 3 years is gone. Permanently, unless real returns close the gap going forward. That is not cause for despair, it is cause for clarity. Every dollar you earn from this point forward, every dollar you hold, every decision about where to put your savings, those decisions are made in a world where inflation is a permanent operating cost of holding money. Not always this high, not always this damaging, but always there, always working against the static balance, always favoring movement over stillness, strategy over passivity, awareness over assumption. The money in your account is not just a number. It is a claim on the real world, on goods, on services, on security, on freedom. Inflation is a slow challenge to that claim, and the best defense is not a specific investment, not a particular financial product, not a magic strategy. It is simply this: knowing exactly what is happening to your money and making deliberate choices in response. You saved. You did the right thing. Now do the next right thing, which is to understand exactly what you have and what it will take to protect it. The number on your screen is not the number that matters. The number that matters is what it buys. Make sure you know both.